Hello there everyone, today's video is all about the triple lock, specifically asking, is it the end for the triple lock? So the triple lock, as you'll recall, is all to do with the state pension and specifically how much it is guaranteed to increase by every year. So at the moment, the triple lock comprises of the highest of these three things, 2.5%, wage growth or inflation. So every year the state pension will go up by the highest of those three elements. Okay? Now, what's been touted around in the press is that the government cannot afford to maintain the triple lock, principally because of the effects of COVID, specifically around criteria number 2, the wage growth. Because of the statistical anomaly in how the wage growth is calculated, based on the fact that a lot of people, millions of people were paid 80% of their salaries during the furlough, and now people are going to be coming back to work. So the actual wage growth is statistically very high. It is actually going to be around about 8.8% or nearly 9%. That is what statisticians reckon will happen. So that 8 or 9% will obviously, as the triple lock works, be higher than the rate of inflation, which in itself is going up, could be about 3 or 4%, and the 2.5% fixed amount. So to increase the pensions by 8% or 9% will cost an absolute fortune. Hence, many people speculate that the government will break their promise. So, just having a little look into this, one of the things that I'm always fascinated about in the tax world is the reason behind certain tax policies, why were things brought in the first place, and the evolution of specific tax rules over years, often decades. So, if we take a look at pensions, state pensions in the UK, and the evolution of the increase in those state pensions, it's quite an interesting topic. So the history of the increase in the state pension in 1979, when Thatcher got into power, the state pension at that point was pegged only to prices, not to wage growth. So that was pegged to prices, and it continued to be the same for many years. Previous to that, it had been pegged to wage growth, and what happened was that actually the increase in the pension got so derisory that by the year 2000, it famously increased by only 75 pence a week. So state pension went up 75 pence a week in 2000. That created such a media backlash at the time. There's a lot of outbreak in the press that Gordon Brown said, look, that is absolutely crazy. I will introduce this fixed amount, 2.5%. So that's where the 2.5% came from. So that's around 20 years ago now. So state pension go up 2.5% every year. And then the triple lock, well, that's been around for about 10 years. So that was a coalition policy when the Tories got in, shared government with the Lib Dems, and they said, right, we will bring in the triple lock, which, as I've said, is the highest of 2.5% wage growth or inflation. Now, in terms of this projected 8.8% wage increase, statisticians reckon that for every 1% increase, that's going to cost £900 million. So you can imagine if you've got an increase closer to 9%, you're looking at about £8 billion being the cost to provide this increase in the state pension, which is a big amount. But people would argue also, on the contrary, they're saying it's actually needed, it's necessary, because we're only playing catch up anyway. That the state pension, the increase in the state pension, lagged so far behind wage increases for decades that even now, yes, you're going to have this incredible one-off rise of 8 or 9% costing many billions, but we're still only catching up. So let me show you some figures on this. So it's predicted that by the time we get to 2038, by the time we get to 2038, so still 15 years or more from now, the state pension will only be about 26% of earnings. So in other words, the state pension for the year will be roughly about a quarter of what the average salary, the average wages, the average earnings are in the UK. And that is only back to 1979's level. That's what it was in the late 70s, that the state pension was more or less about a quarter of, 26% of earnings. So people who argue that it's a good thing that the state pension is rising say, well, look, we're not even at the level it was before in terms of being how it's linked to the average earnings. Now, in the UK, we're not as good as our international peers as well. The state pension, as generous as people may think it is, compared to some of these other countries in the developed world, is a lot less. So we spend about 4.5% of GDP on the state pension in the UK, but that is set to rise probably to around about 7% of GDP in 2066 because people are living that much longer. But this was an interesting statistic here. This is the one that I had no idea about until I did a bit of research on this, that even for the next decade or more, decade and a half, we still will probably only get back to the state pension being 26% of earnings. So this fuels the argument that says, well, we're only playing catch up anyway, that for decades the state pension has been too low because it didn't rise with earnings for all those years. It only rose with those prices, the price levels, the inflation, which resulted in that derisory 75p a week increase in the year 2000, which then brought in the 2.5%, which then 10 years later brought in the triple lock. So it's an interesting area, and we'll see how it develops because obviously it's very political as well. So what will Chancellor Sunak do? Will he break the Tory party promise and end the triple lock, or will he maintain it and bite the bullet and just keep it going? And like I said, people who are in favour would argue that we're only playing catch up anyway, and we're still behind where it was decades ago in terms of relative to the average earnings in the country, what you can get when you retire under the state pension. So, just an overview there on the triple lock. Is it the end of the triple lock? We shall see. If you like this video, please do subscribe just about there. And as always, I'll see you soon.